We are former DoD employees speaking in our personal capacity only. Nothing we say reflects the official position of the U.S. government or any agency. All content is based on publicly available open source information. No classified material is ever discussed.
Hello and welcome to the Two Beards Debrief podcast. This week we'll be talking about the Epstein files, the retaliatory strikes in Syria for the death of 2 soldiers from America, and how to make AI hallucinate less.
All right.
Starting off, Epstein files, they've been in the press in and out, whenever president's talking about it, whenever anyone's talking about it in Congress, and just there's been a whole push to release them, had members of Congress basically demonstrating outside Capitol building, and we got files. We got, 13,000 documents, heavily redacted. I don't know if this has anything to do with the Onion article where the CIA just realized that they've been using black highlighters all these years, but
Almost spit coffee.
yeah, but there have been a number of files that vanished from the DOJ's website less than a day after they were posted, including some photos of the president with Jeffrey Epstein. These were published under an Epstein Files Transparency Act that the president signed. And then it's been an ongoing call for release. The major conspiracy theory that goes through is like Epstein didn't kill himself. There's been missing pieces of, evidence that could really definitively say whether or not he killed himself. You've got Kash Patel, who before was saying, oh, it was definitely, an inside job or something like that. And now he's directing the FBI as like, yeah, no, he didn't kill himself. Like he went on Rogan and said that, and it's just back and forth. And I think that this is classic increasing of ambiguity in order to obfuscate the truth. And
Yeah.
so you've really got to intake a lot of different types of sources to get the whole picture. And even then, unless you're in the classified spaces, which we are no longer privy to, you're not going to get the whole thing.
Of classified, you don't have the whole thing. Hence why
Yeah, because you're read into specific
why you do
programs, and
assessments.
yeah, yeah, and you're not going to get all the pieces every time. I just think it definitely puts an asterisk next to the administration claiming they're the most transparent administration in recent memory.
Fair.
Yeah, I can't understand why they would post all these things. Like, I get redacting victim names. Like, the victims who have come forward to testify, they should be commended and supported, but you can't redact the perpetrators.
Well
And again,
put.
yeah, I know it's like, innocent until proven guilty, but you've got these victims who came forward and named names, and the proof is in those documents somewhere, whether or not they're telling the truth. And
Well,
like,
I,
we should have the information to see, who's lying, who's telling the truth. And it's all about saving face for the people in those books.
well, I have definitely not read the Epstein files, not even a part of the reams of Epstein files.
Hmm.
So, perhaps if I did, I'd have less questions. But at this point, I seem to only have questions. Probably one of the first things, well, there's a couple things that come to mind. One of them's kind of a pet peeve. The other one's really just probably a kind of a primary question that usually comes up in my mind with all kinds of things. But I'll start with the primary question is obviously, unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably pretty aware that there's been plenty of, not even in just the news. I mean, even in pretty much all forms of, social media, etc.
All forms of media.
All forms of media, yeah. Um, all kinds of theories. Some of them contradict each other. He did kill himself. He did. He didn't. He did. There weren't as many. Just because there was young girls around doesn't mean they were all handled inappropriately or
Hmm.
victims. And some say, well, they all were. And so I wasn't there. I don't know. I suppose usually, as the case usually is, that the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Right.
The question that comes out of that in my mind is, okay, it's easy to come out with all kinds of, I mean, almost, to a level of conspiracy theories of, what the missing information could mean. And it's usually almost the worst case scenario.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen in media, oh, Hillary went to Epstein's Island and was there with underage girls. Bill Clinton went to Epstein Island, was there with underage girls.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying it's one way or the other, but what comes to mind is, well, out of somewhere in the middle, some of this might have some very reasonable explanation. Not all of it.
Right.
I think that's unlikely.
Yeah.
Um,
When your
and
rich
then I
investment friend owns his own island in the Caribbean, it's like, yeah, you're gonna wanna check it out. You're gonna want, the privacy security that comes with having a couple of private islands.
It's more than that. I mean, when you have another wealthy friend who has other wealthy acquaintances who are the who's who and the movers and the shakers, and you would like to meet some of these people that are a little hard to meet sometimes, it's a great method to meet
Yeah.
people. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not the only way people do it.
Right, yeah, yeah. Tropical vacation notwithstanding, networking is important, especially when you get into those upper tiers of income and influence. I think that the reason that the conspiracy theories are holding on so strongly is because it is a perfect storm of events
Well,
where this guy gets convicted as a pedophile. He's been associated with all of these elected officials and celebrities, and there's a word for that kind of person. There's a number of people who are like that in the public face, but the the main thing is that he had all these connections, he was in prison, and then he just dies, supposedly by suicide. It's very, very clean.
okay, I agree. Some of that seems, from what I've heard about the details, seem that they lend themselves to circumstantial suspicions of what might have happened. But I would also point out that it's not entirely out of the norm that people who feel they've fallen a long, long ways become suicidal. So I'm not saying that it's
No,
impossible,
you're right, and it goes back and forth
but the
because
circumstances seem a little odd. Like
yeah,
people jumping out of, skyscrapers because they lost a lot of money in the stock market
yes,
doesn't mean they got pushed,
right,
but some people have been pushed out of buildings,
yeah. Or you're someone of note in Russia and you speak out against Putin and the Kremlin, and
and your
then
plane blows up.
or you fall out of a third-story window.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes to mind is there is, within the United States, we're not unique to this, but we're here, so this matters. There is a precedence for redacting information for a number of reasons,
Right.
besides just protecting your personal reputation.
Mhm.
One of which is uh, skill craft of, intelligence or
Yeah,
criminal investigations.
right.
I'm not saying I don't have a theory. I'm not saying that's what was going on. However, somebody of that, level tier in society there might have been some people on those planes,
Mhm.
possibly, maybe not, associations that are been recorded that we'd rather, for national security type reasons, would rather not expose, because people like to dig and figure
Yeah, I
things
know.
out.
Right.
I'm just saying there could be some legitimate reasons.
And the administration has brought out the national security excuse for the delay in the release of these files and stuff, and I it's my personal opinion that it's more of a national security risk if you have elected officials who are on this list and the list is not public, then they can be blackmailed. Whereas if the list is publicized, there's no longer anything that can be held against them for blackmail. They're out of a job because they're pedophiles and disgusting. But
We should get Jack Nicholson in here, and he can tell us we can't handle the truth. Well, there's also some precedents. Now, to your point, I think that it is possible, or I could word this as a question. Is it possible that the national security objectives and risks, for the reasons for redactions, is it possible it could be abused? Which I think is kind of to your point. It's easy to, when you don't have to provide an answer, and it encourages the, people that believe in protecting that to not ask questions. It's a little easy to fly that flag and then go,
right.
well, you can't ask me.
Yeah.
But there is a precedence to also protect people,
Yes, that's true.
like the Kennedy assassination. There's still some names in that investigation that
Yeah.
are protected, redacted
Yeah.
for now
Yeah,
until they
and
pass, as we're told.
there's another set of, papers that was supposed to be released during this administration. We've yet to see anything groundbreaking, and part of me likes to think that, oh, well, maybe that's because there isn't. And then the other part of me is like, no, there was just way too much that was unanswered then that definitely would have been answered in a federal investigation after the assassination of the sitting president that exist out there somewhere. Like those records are out there.
Well, with the age of the internet, once they're out there, I don't know which photo of Trump and Epstein that they pulled, but there's already photos out in the internet and on people's computers and sitting around and printed. You're not going to get rid of that
Right.
evidence
Yeah.
entirely. I mean, it may be so many times removed, and well, you can't really use it in
Yeah.
court of law.
So like
But
why even bother removing it from the DOJ website and causing us and the media to talk about it?
well, I mean, we could pontificate on a lot of these what ifs. Like I said, we while we really have our questions, I would point out that there are things that have been so redacted for decades that there was just absolute denial of even
Mhm.
the program. That there wasn't even a little bit of information that, to our knowledge, is pretty much fully released now.
Yeah.
Going along details, but I mean, we've got Project Ultra and several other
Yeah. MK Ultra,
high. Yep.
Stargate.
Yeah. Those, and then all kinds of testing, top secret, compartmentalized
Mhm.
stuff back in the
Yeah.
day that's been fully publicized now. And there was all kinds of conspiracy theories about some of this stuff.
Mhm.
And, with, the reason conspiracy theories or that type of thinking and, postulating happens is because sometimes there's a little bit of truth in
Mhm.
there as it comes out.
Fun trivia fact, who the number one user of the Freedom of Information Act is?
No, who?
Foreign governments.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, why not? If why I that reminds me of I don't know how many times when I was in the intelligence field, we'd be digging and digging and digging and digging, and then, I'd go or somebody else would be like, maybe we're looking in the wrong place, and lo and behold, it's just out in the open on a university website somewhere. It's not classified information, it was just information we needed to help us confirm what we were suspecting. I mean, that's just one example, but there's plenty of examples. Going to something we mentioned earlier in this podcast is Intel. I know you had this experience when you were an Intel guy. People would ask, "Who killed Kennedy?" and "What's at Area 51?" As if they thought, "Well, now we're in." It's like there's a Pandora's box. You open it, and everything good and bad is in there, right?
Yeah.
And that's not how it works.
Nope.
That's why we're analysts and did assessments, and you did best case, worst case, what we know. Vice President Cheney probably said it best. In fact, I remember when he said it, the news made fun of him. It's like, oh, he got tongue tied and he doesn't even know what he's saying, and it's a bunch of jarbled mess. And you know exactly what I'm going to say, don't you?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. And now I'm gonna botch it.
Yeah.
Help me out here. It's we know what we don't know, but it's what we don't know that we don't know.
That scares us.
Yeah, that scares us. And people are
Yeah.
like, "What kind of mumbo jumbo is that?" But
Yeah.
I remember hearing that going, "That makes absolute total sense." So there is this one story out there. It doesn't get published much, and I think it doesn't get much traction. I find it interesting though, and it has to do with the Epstein files. So this was a few years ago. In 2021, there was an interview. Uh, Chris Tucker did, the comedian actor. And he just said right there in the interview, I mean, you can YouTube it. There's a video of it. And he goes, "Oh no, I was on Epstein's plane. Like the plane you're talking about, what was it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the plane I was on. I've and they were like, "Wait, you're," and he goes, "Look, let me explain." He goes, "I'll just be honest." And I think that's probably why we don't see a lot of information about it, because he was just upfront and honest. He goes, if they want to release stuff and it comes out, I can tell you exactly what they're going to find about me. He goes, as many actors and comedians, get some notoriety and get known. I've been approached by all kinds of nonprofits to be a face for this or a fundraiser for that or go shake hands here and there. I wasn't even that involved. My manager said, "Hey, there's this opportunity to go do this thing for this humanitarian trip to Africa, focus on HIV and AIDS awareness. And there's going to be some other important people there. Bill Clinton will be there and a bunch of other famous people." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, I'll do that." They tell me where to go,
Mhm.
pack a bag. Go to the airport, I get on a plane, we go. I saw the name of the plane. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, it's an odd, kind of unique name, so it stuck in my memory. I
Right.
didn't know it was Jeffrey Epstein's plane. I didn't go to his island. I don't even know where the island is. Yeah, I've heard about it though, but I've been on the plane. So if you want to look at the flight logs and they release it, he goes, my name's probably on there because it should be. And there's probably a lot of those names in there.
Yeah. That's said like a man who's got nothing to hide. And I appreciate the candidness.
Apparently, he decided the best approach was just get out in front of it and be truthful and honest. I'm not saying he was or wasn't truthful or
Right.
honest, but
Yeah.
if he was, I think that's a
Right.
great approach.
Yeah. It's the people who were mentioned who haven't talked about it that concern me.
Yeah. I'll just say this and we'll probably move on. But there's been times in my life I've talked too much and realized, man, I should probably say less. But there are people who just don't talk much about their personal life. You don't really hear much about them. And it's not a bad policy. I mean, depending on what you're doing in life. And there are probably a lot of people that are in that same boat and they go, look, no news is good news. Done that my whole life. And why do I have to come out and talk about it? And it's like voting. A lot of people like to talk about who they voted for, but that's one of the key fundamentals of our right to vote is you also don't have to, and you don't have to share it. That's why you vote behind a screen and behind a curtain.
All right. So moving on, for those of you unaware, back on the 13th of December, there was an ambush in Palmyra, Syria, that claimed the lives of two Iowa National Guard members and their American civilian interpreter. The attack was claimed by ISIS. The attribution does remain unclear. However, a couple of days ago, the U.S. forces struck multiple targets across Syria in retaliation for that attack, including strikes in Darzar, Palmyra, and Raqqa. So we had a number of U.S. fighter jets, attack helicopters, HIMARS systems. The Jordanian F-16s were there, striking more than 130 mortar and rockets and 70 targets around 2:15 a.m. local. Officials are framing the strikes as a sharp escalation, while about 1,000 troops are still in Syria on nearly 80 separate missions in July. America has been on the ground in Syria for a number of years now, initially supporting the counter Assad forces. And now uh, that Assad has been ousted and the new president, Sarraj, has taken office, relations are up. And so I think that it's a good thing that we have another potential partner in the region to help us continue to squash terrorism, however it pops up, even if we're working with a former Al Qaeda affiliate member in the process.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to mention that. I knew one of us would. Okay, my first reaction is, and I don't speak for anybody. It's just thoughts I have. Is with that particular Syrian president.
Mhm.
I don't think this is why we did it, but I do think it is a good, sharp reminder to that Syrian president of how quickly we can respond and how quickly we can strike his, I guess you would call it former associates, even if they're loosely
Well,
affiliated.
yeah, yeah. So, like, this is attributed to ISIS. He was a group leader. I don't know if they fell under the terrorist blanket, by the U.S. Treasury or not, but they were affiliated with Al Qaeda.
Yeah. And we should probably make it clear right here that, there is some perception that ISIS was just a reforming of Al Qaeda and it's just a new name, same group. Not
Right.
necessarily. Not to say
Yes.
that there weren't members of one that
Hmm.
transitioned to the other, but you also have to keep in mind that depending on where you are in the Middle East, but is kind of a general rule of thumb, it's much more tribal than it
Yes.
is national.
Yes. Absolutely.
And along those lines, that's why you'll see it more in like Afghanistan. You have what they call warlords, which if they aren't warring, they're essentially
De facto
probably
governor.
exactly. They're a de facto governor. They're the ruling, whatever, however structure you want to go by, they're the ruling member of that group of people. In that case, their tribe, their clan, their families, the area, which kind of all go together. So, yeah, just because they used to be on the opposite side of the US doesn't mean they were ISIS. And we could be talking, but back to our point, I think one thing that also kind of gets lost is we haven't really been seeing a lot in the news about action in Syria, U.S. action in Syria. There has been, from what I'm seeing, about 1,000 U.S. troops in Syria
Mhm.
for a while. This isn't
Yeah.
new. I mean,
Yep.
that's why we lost 3 people, 2 US military members because
Yep.
we're already there.
Yeah. And have been.
And yeah, and that's boots on the ground. That's that doesn't count the capability and whatever ongoing missions there are in the sky that are based out of other countries. So this isn't exactly new. This is a retaliatory piece, and it made a huge statement. And it seemed like they got pretty busy and struck a lot of effective targets.
Yeah, I honestly, after the fight against ISIS in Iraq, I can't fathom there being much left for them to base themselves out of because unfortunately that was the largest city in the north of Syria and it was just absolutely leveled from years and years of fighting in the Civil War and then in the counter ISIS operations that the U.S. led with their coalition partners.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, No, I'd love to think that it's finally done. I don't think that will be the case. Going back to the whole kind of that tribal mentality, they hold grudges, even if it's not a grudge against the U.S., which probably does and will continue to exist. Sometimes I think it spills over,
Hmm.
has a lot more to do with internal strife and objectives, and then because we're there and involved, we get in the way. Yes, they do target U.S. But I think what I'm saying is if we weren't there in the first place, they probably wouldn't give two hoots. We were just in the way and helping the wrong side, that wasn't helping them. So part I appreciate.
Yes.
He didn't even I think there's less of a need to keep that hush hush quiet quiet without going in a lot of detail. And you'll find out when everyone else finds out. But then there's other times where doesn't make a difference. What are they going to do?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how these soldiers and the interpreter were killed. I guess it might have been an ambush or what have you. The US always has a tendency to retaliate a little more strongly than it is struck.
It does seem to happen.
It's like the US has a bit of a temper. Like if it gets slapped, it's going to throw fists for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah. I looked it up real quick. It's saying that the the 3 individuals that 2 US military members and 1 civilian that were killed in Syria, that it was in an ambush that involved a lone gunman.
Okay.
It doesn't go into a lot of other detail, but that
Hmm.
would that seems likely. I don't
Yeah.
really have a lot of reason to question that. That seems to fit the area and the style, and
Right. Yeah.
it would be a lot easier to pull off an attack in
Yeah,
that style.
absolutely. They probably used the classic method of infiltrating security forces, purporting themselves as a Syrian supporter, Syrian government.
Here you go. They opened fire on a joint US Syrian group during a key leader engagement. And I think we're pretty familiar with typically
Yeah,
how those go.
the KLEs. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are typically always a very vulnerable,
Yes.
what we would call force protection,
Yep.
very vulnerable type of scenario. You do what you can, but you don't control everything.
Right. You can prepare for most things. You can't prepare for everything.
Yeah. It being called an insider, it represents an insider threat exploiting joint operations. And yeah,
Yeah.
that
Okay.
your assessment seemed pretty accurate.
Yeah. I'm just happy that there was retaliation. We don't take that kind of thing lying down, especially since we're not technically at war with anyone at the moment.
Yeah. Well, we haven't technically been at war since the end of World War II.
I mean, we had GWAT. That was
It wasn't an actual war. It was in the name, but Congress hasn't declared war since World War II. We have been in to
I
steal one out of Russia's book. Well, I think Russia stole it out of ours because it works so well with international
yeah,
law. We've just been doing
special military
operations.
operation.
Yeah,
3 days in out.
yeah, we've been helping NATO at GWAT and
Yeah.
all of that.
Well,
That's
NATO was helping us. Yeah.
there you go. Yes, but
Cool.
yeah.
All right. For science and tech, what do you got for us today?
Yeah. So on that front, there was an article in Tech Juice titled AI Can Mirror Human Personalities, Why Experts Fear AI Psychosis and Manipulation. And this was just published a day or two ago. And they were discussing some recent scientific studies showing that the more advanced AI language models can reliably, and I think that's probably the notable thing, or one of the notable things, can reliably mimic stable human like personality traits. So apparently it's able to pick up stable. So I'm assuming that kind of insinuates that it needs to be consistent. If you're all over the place mentally, it's not going to be able to pick up a real clear pattern. But it is able to pick up a bunch of human like personality traits. So researchers from several places, University of Cambridge, Google DeepMind, they published a paper on some of this. And they were along the lines of measuring synthetic personalities in these LLMs or large language models. They tested 18 of these LLMs
Okay.
and they developed the first validated psychological framework to assess synthetic personalities in AI. And
Interesting.
they tested this the way they would test a basic human personalities,
Yeah. Yeah.
real people. They use the big five traits for those that are familiar or want to look it up, but they're being tested on openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And they tested 18 of these LLMs, but they noticed in particular they were talking about ChatGPT 4 and Google's Flan. And these in particular were consistently displaying these reliable, stable personality traits, like they would stay in these personalities. They were saying that smaller or base models often lack consistency. And I don't know, doesn't say here exactly what lends itself to that.
My educated guess would be just the amount of processing power behind it and the information on which it was trained.
That's where I was assuming there's maybe, I don't want to say code because I don't think it's exactly quite how it works from what I understand. It's the training.
Less
Yeah.
developed, less trained models.
So what they did notice was that a model shaped for high neuroticism generated like social media style posts with negative words like hate, depressed, and angry. And I was like, I hope that doesn't mean it because we're on social media now that we're high neuroticism. They also point out one shape for emotional stability use positive terms like happy and relaxing as, just for
Mhm.
examples. These are the kinds of things I kind of file in the back of my head. And now that going forward, when I hear those kinds of words, even if they're not used in that way, but I hear it coming out of AI, I'm suddenly going to want to like test it to see if it's one of these. And here's where they gets, well, something we can probably discuss and things that are interesting going forward. They pointed out some of their concerns as experts, labeling them as risks. One being manipulation, their worry. And I think I might word it a little differently, but I don't disagree. Bad actors could create highly convincing, misleading content. For example, in politics or scams that are harder to detect. I think without AI, it's bad enough already. Think the risk here is it's easier for more people to do it who wouldn't otherwise have the skills or just wouldn't put in the necessary time and effort to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's being commercialized. So of course you're going to develop these things to a certain point where you can then have users pay to continue building it out for their specific needs.
I don't disagree.
I just wanted to mention 60% of human communication is nonverbal. And so if you're only using 40% to communicate with a chatbot, you're missing out on a lot of cues. And so it's interesting to me how things like the tone of the response and the specific wording that it uses can influence people using just that smaller portion of the human communicative experience.
Now that you mention that, I have noticed having that, I guess you would say, feeling that sometimes when I'm talking, specifically when I'm talking with AI, not typing, because I usually only talk to it when I'm driving.
Yeah.
But when I'm talking with it, feel like I am having a conversation. I felt this more than once with an individual who's from a cultural and social norm that the more respectful they are being, the less they
Mhm.
look at you
Yeah.
and to show very little emotion.
Right.
And I'm aware of it. I've experienced it before. I've had to work with some individuals and I recognize that that's what's happening. Not that they're being rude or shy or bashful, but I've never gotten used to it. So
Mhm.
I've been aware and then I try to adjust and be hyper aware and draw out in conversation what I can't otherwise think I'm picking up on.
Okay.
And I get that feeling sometimes. I'm like, I hear inflection, but sometimes it feels wrong. And I wish I could see them talking.
Yeah, it's almost like you're working with a foreign partner whose English is not their first language. And so they'll pronounce the word just slightly off. The definition of fluency is being able to convey your meaning and thoughts in a language, regardless of how you get there.
I will say, and this is only my personal perspective and my personal experience, but when I'm been in those situations and I'm aware of it, I do make that extra effort. Sometimes they do too, but I will make an extra effort to have extra discourse to help define what we're talking about. Use extra
Hmm.
words, kind of test it back and
Yep.
forth.
Right.
What both of my sons, they can quote this to you right off the top of their heads if you ask. But I go, "What is communication?" I go, "It's a two-way exchange and confirmation of information,
Hmm.
not just me saying something and you nodding your head. I have no idea if you got the message I was trying to
Yeah.
give to you."
Right.
Anybody that's had teenagers understands that frustration. So, but yeah, but it is a pet peeve of mine in general that I find an awful lot of disagreements and arguments and misunderstandings. I think a lot of it comes from what I call using different lexicons. The
Hmm.
words you're using that you associate a certain meaning to, the other party does not associate the same meaning to those words. So the lexicon being used is not the same.
Yeah. That's where more communication usually encourages more clarity.
Yeah, and when you're having a difficult time understanding what or thinking that you understand what the other person says and you start doing that, I think sometimes you have better communication in the end. But back to our experts' concerns with some of these personality abilities of AI, the next one they highlighted was political discourse, specifically steering public opinion subtly. I don't think, just as I said before, I don't think any of this is new. I think it's just that it makes it easier for a person to do.
Hmm.
Or if they're using AI heavily, more professionally, what's the word I'm looking for here? But when you start having it do things for you, you've developed agents that are doing a lot of processes for you. It can do a lot of this stuff automatically as you tweak it and get it trained to your objective. And that, I mean, that kind of stuff takes a lot of brain power and a lot of focus to do it individually. To have something do this for you where you can sit back and focus on something else. And then the last one they pointed out was AI psychosis, where what they're describing users forming unhealthy emotional bonds with AI, reinforcing false beliefs or distorting reality. I think we already see a bit of this problem already without AI. People that bite off on people who read an onion report and think it's
Yeah.
it's reality, people that see a fake documentary and think that mermaids are real.
Yes.
That's actually a real story that we both know.
Yes. Yeah. I think that, I always say that AI is like a toddler with knowledge of the entire Library of Congress. And so it's a very stunted initial conversation. But if you ask for specific things, you will get those specific things. If you ask in generalities, you're going to get more ambiguous answers. And sometimes they're not going to be completely accurate.
Well, I think in a way, I think that absolutely makes sense. So, from my understanding, okay, I don't want to say all AI, but the common publicly used AIs typically are using, well, some aspect of the internet.
Right.
It has
Yep.
pretty much access to anything that you have access to without a subscription. And I don't know how many, this isn't a foreign concept. If you want to prove something, you just have to go on the internet and find it. You
Yeah.
can prove either
Yeah.
side to an argument and everything in between and some outliers.
Hmm.
And that's what it's working with and then trying to discern what's fact and what isn't and then test, reality check it,
Yep.
which is actually we're going to talk about in a second. But I
Do you
think
remember
also
Tay?
which Tay?
Tay, the Microsoft chatbot that was uploaded to Twitter like almost 10 years ago?
I heard about it. I had no experience
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. So Microsoft made a chatbot. They put it on Twitter and, explained, hey, this is designed to mimic the language patterns of a 19-year-old American girl. And it's going to learn from interacting with human users on Twitter. And, humans being overarchingly deplorable,
Yep. I see where this is headed.
there's enough bad apples out there, especially on the internet, where the cloak of anonymity allows them to say the most unhinged things. And by the time that they had to bring Tay offline, people were asking, did the Holocaust happen? And it was responding, no, no, it was made up entirely. It was constantly tweeting out racist remarks and just all sorts of conspiracy theories as fact. I think it tweeted like almost 100,000 tweets within a day of being uploaded and released. And it was shut down because it had been completely unhinged through interactions with people on the internet.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. There's a lot of things I don't remember about being a very young kid. However, I have much better memories. My memory seems to work better as I've gotten old. I can
Yeah.
remember some stuff, but I remember my kids when they were young, and other people's kids. And there's that age range where they can now carry on conversations, and now they're talking with their other friends of the same age range who can also
Hmm.
have conversations, and the things they discuss as fact and they argue about sounds a lot like, these early stages. And sometimes now it's like they haven't tested any of this. And it's what you were saying earlier reminds me of the difference between someone who's knowledgeable and somebody with wisdom is knowledge and experience. And it's kind of hard for AI to get experience with any of this stuff. It can't put its hand on a hot burner and know that, burners are hot, can
Yeah.
be hot, and
Yeah.
flames are hot. It only knows what it's read.
It knows it from anecdotal evidence, and that's it. It's
Yeah.
all secondhand knowledge that it's gained. It doesn't experience these things for itself. And so it's always going to have a disconnected interpretation of the knowledge.
Yeah. There's some key areas a person could do a little more research if they want to get more familiar. And I'm going to recommend some terms to help kind of narrow that research, when you're typing things in, looking for it. But, on the front of user education and learn about AI limitations, and kind of what you're looking for is to try to understand these chatbots, how they prioritize engagement over truth,
Hmm.
which is, a lot of times they're more engaging than focused on just the truth, how they can reinforce biases. They're not therapists. You can use it to research stuff, but there's one in particular, Grok,
Therapist mode. Yeah.
yeah, therapist mode, where it kind of role plays being a therapist and asking
Hmm.
questions, but it's not an actual therapist. So keep that in mind. I'm sure it will improve, but AI design and development safeguards. So oftentimes, I say oftentimes, it depends on how depraved you want to get, I suppose. But sometimes when I'm talking, it'll go, "Oh, I'm sorry, my guidelines and won't allow me to discuss that." And I'm like, "What in the world does it think I said?" Where, but it won't tell me what specifically either. So
Yes.
then I just reword it, and it goes, "Oh, I misunderstood you."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay."
Sure.
But yeah, there are guidelines, developmental safeguards. I think understanding those a little bit can help you go, okay, I don't I'm not going to get valid feedback because
Right.
it's not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Although there's sometimes you can trick it into doing all kinds of things.
My number one thing that I will do when, starting a new conversation in Grok or ChatGPT or, Copilot, whatever I'm using is, when it provides me with the response to cite the sources used in that
Yes,
response.
I
And
do that a
Grok
lot.
is actually really good about that. So it'll provide the sources. You can go into the settings of how you want to interact with whatever chatbot you're using or LL. And I will always just write in there, be succinct but detailed and then cite any sources used for responses. That way, you keep a human in the loop. You can click on those links, you can read it for yourself. And if it takes you to like, a post on 4chan, then this is probably not the most reliable information in this answer.
Yeah, for sure. There are a couple, well, more than a couple, but so, we've talked about this. There are some generally a good place to start in phraseology. It's
Mhm.
been my experience that different wording things in different ways will get different responses, and it's not always intuitive how to direct it to get the kind of response you want. And
Yeah.
we've talked a bit about AI hallucinating. It's getting a little better, but there are things that you can instruct it to help limit or reduce the hallucination type of responses from AI.
Mhm.
So one of these is to simply, type or say, if you don't know the answer or unsure, say, I don't know, or I'm not certain. Do not make up information. I've actually
Yeah.
used this one quite a bit,
Yep.
and it will then, I sometimes forget to say it up front because there's excuse me, a lot of things you could say up front and it gets very wordy. But when it starts to wander, I'll say that or something similar. And then I'll be like, oh, I'm sorry. And it'll start correcting itself.
Yeah. It's very apologetic,
Yeah. Very agreeable
especially
and apologetic.
especially when you call it out like you just made that entire episode of that TV show that does not exist. Please check your facts. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I must have completed this, this, and this. I'm like, yeah, you did. But if I didn't know about it in advance, that I'm like, oh, I got to go find that episode now
Yeah. Hey,
because
well,
I've
hey, you
never
know what?
seen it.
It could be great for coming up with future ideas, but for some things.
Yeah, no, just wait for the next Hollywood writers' strike.
This episode brought to you by ChatGPT and Grok.
Yeah, yep,
Hence why it argues prioritize truth over agreement. So this one's pretty good for reducing a couple of things, but just asking it to be maximally truthful and honest. Prioritize accuracy and factual correctness over being agreeable or flattering. If I say
yes,
something is wrong or questionable, correct it. Or if something I say is wrong or questionable, correct it directly
hmm
versus it. There's times I've misspoken or chose a wrong word, without realizing it, and it just runs with it. I'm like, whoa, no, that's wrong.
yeah, that's good because it's essentially deactivating the echo chamber that some users get into. Like, oh, it's agreeing with me, so I must be right, and so you never discuss about anything that you disagree with.
Sounds like a sales tactic.
Yeah,
Not always a good one, but
right.
a common one.
Yeah.
Another one is encouraging admission of uncertainty. And I also use something like this pretty often because I'm discussing things that I'm trying to bridge the gap between information.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for that. Once again, we'd like to thank you for listening to the Two Beards podcast. I won't get to go off my rant about how FedEx is a terrible logistics company this week, but maybe I'll get some more fodder for it in the next episode. Thanks again.